I still can't believe how stupid we were that night, missing the last train and ending up stranded in the middle of nowhere with nothing but a half-empty bottle of cheap whiskey and a broken umbrella. It sounds like the setup for some bad joke, but honestly, it turned out to be one of those rare nights you don't forget, no matter how much you try. So there I was, standing on the platform of a tiny suburban train station. Well, what was left of it after the rush hour crowd had vanished, watching the last train pull away without us. Next train wouldn't come until well after midnight, and we were about an hour away from my place. A 20-minute cab ride in a city like this was expensive enough. But now, there were no cabs, no buses, and the night was drizzling just enough to make things miserable. I glanced over at Jamie, who was trying to shield himself from the rain with that pathetic umbrella, which was already turned inside out by the wind. Somehow, he still looked impossibly calm, like he wasn't worried about the whole mess. That was one of the things I liked most about him. He could stay grounded even when things were falling apart around us. We'd only met a few weeks earlier, at this little indie coffee shop where I'd accidentally knocked his laptop off the table while trying to reach for my latte. After apologizing about a dozen times and offering to pay for whatever he needed fixed, we ended up talking for ages about everything from music to our terrible taste in movies. Fast forward a few dates, and here we were, sharing a bottle of whiskey on a damp train platform, like some cliché rom-com scene gone wrong. The station was eerily quiet, except for the occasional buzz of a flickering street lamp across the tracks and the low hum of distant traffic. The rain felt like it was seeping into my bones, and I could tell Jamie was just as cold. His hands were in his jacket pockets, but his shoulders looked tense, like he was trying to will the night to be over. "Maybe we should just start walking?" I suggested, mostly to break the silence. Jamie looked up, his eyes reflecting the dull light of the station. "Walk? Through the rain? In this part of town? Are you serious?" I shrugged. "Could be worse. We don't have many options." He laughed softly, the sound warm and genuine despite the circumstances. "You're insane." That laugh made me feel a little less panicked. Maybe because it reminded me this was just one messed up night and not the end of the world. But as I looked around trying to find any sign of life or a place to wait out the rain, it felt like the city had disappeared, leaving us alone to figure out what the hell to do next. And then, just as I was about to admit defeat, Jamie nudged me and pointed across the tracks. "Hey, isn't that the old shelter, the one no one ever uses?" I squinted through the rain and saw a small, graffiti-tagged building with a flickering light inside. It looked sketchy as hell, but at that point, it might as well have been a palace. "Only one way to find out," I said, and we started toward it, both of us silently hoping it wouldn't turn out to be another mistake. Because at that moment, with the rain soaking through my clothes and the night stretching out ahead of us, I realized that missing that last train might have been exactly the beginning of something unexpected. Something I wasn't ready for. The shelter was this rickety little shack, half buried in weeds and smelling like damp cardboard and old smoke. Not exactly five-star accommodations, but at least it had a roof and four walls. Jamie pushed the door open with a creak that echoed way too loudly in the quiet night. Inside, there were a couple of battered benches, a flickering fluorescent light that buzzed annoyingly, and a thin layer of grime everywhere. I could see a few discarded beer cans in the corner, left behind by some long-gone drunks, and the walls were covered in peeling posters and that half-faded "no loitering" sign. "Home, sweet home," Jamie said with a grin, dropping his backpack on the floor. I laughed, the weirdness of the situation finally hitting me deeper than the cold. We sat down on opposite benches, the whiskey bottle between us. I twisted the cap off and took a long swig, feeling the burn crawl down my throat. Jamie watched me, eyes flicking between the bottle and my face like he was trying to read my next move. "So," I said, clearing my throat, "how did you end up out here tonight? Last train drama aside." Jamie shrugged, pulling his hood up to keep the rain at bay. "Honestly, I was supposed to be heading home from a friend's place, but I guess I got a little distracted." "You?" "Work ran late. Then I met up with a couple of coworkers for a quick drink, but we lost track of time. Then you showed up looking all cool with your laptop and that smirk. I grinned, and he rolled his eyes. Yeah, well, I'm full of surprises. We were quiet for a moment, the only sounds being the rain tapping against the shelter and the occasional hum of the busted light above us. I looked over at Jamie again. There was something different in his expression tonight. Maybe it was the way the fluorescent light caught his eyes, or the way he leaned forward, elbows on his knees, looking like he was trying to decide whether to say something. Do you ever feel like life just throws you off track? He asked suddenly. I nodded, taking another gulp of whiskey. All the time. Sometimes I think I'm just pretending to have it together. Jamie smiled, but it was a little sad. Yeah, me too. For a second, I thought we might just sit there in awkward silence, but then he leaned over and bumped his shoulder against mine. It was casual, but it sent this weird little electric jolt up my arm. So, Jamie said, his voice softer now, since we're stuck here, what's the craziest thing you've ever done? I laughed, shaking my head. Crazy? Not sure I'm the wild type. Maybe that time I crashed a wedding just to sneak the buffet. What about you? He grinned, eyes twinkling. Well, once I went on a road trip with a guy I'd just met online. No plan, no maps, just drove for 3 days straight. We ended up at a shitty motel in the middle of nowhere and didn't talk the whole time. Looking back, maybe not my best idea. That actually sounds kind of awesome and terrible at the same time, I said. Yeah, Jamie agreed, laughing. Kind of like tonight. We kept talking, sharing stories that felt more honest and unfiltered than anything I'd told a stranger in a long time. The rain slowed down, then stopped altogether, and the shadows outside stretched longer as the night deepened. At some point, the whiskey bottle was empty, and we'd moved closer together on the bench without really noticing. I glanced over at Jamie again, and this time I saw something that made my heart skip. A nervous flicker behind those cool eyes, like he was about to ask or say something big but wasn't sure how. Hey, I said, nudging him gently. We don't have to figure this all out tonight. We're just two idiots stuck in a broken shelter. He smiled, this time with a hint of relief. Yeah, idiots with no plan, but at least we're not alone. I nodded, feeling the weight of those words settle in. Because, weirdly enough, even with the rain gone and the city asleep, I didn't want the night, or this moment, to end. Then, almost like a glitch in the quiet, a distant sound broke through, the low rumble of a train engine. I sat up straight, heart jumping. Is that? I started. Jamie stood and peered out through the rain-speckled glass. Yeah, looks like the first train back this way. Suddenly, the shelter felt way too small, and the thought of going back out into the cold reality was kind of terrifying. I caught Jamie's eye, and without thinking, I reached out and took his hand. He didn't pull away, and just like that, missing that last train didn't feel like a disaster anymore. It felt like the start of something I hadn't been ready to expect, but maybe, just maybe, exactly what I needed. Holding Jamie's hand felt surprisingly natural, like something that should have happened a long time ago, not just here on this grimy bench in a shelter no one cared about. His fingers were warm despite the damp chill, and I realized I didn't want to let go, not even when the train started to roll closer, its headlights cutting through the dark like a spotlight. Looks like our ride's here, I said, trying to sound casual but feeling my voice crack a little. Jamie gave me a small shake of his head, that same teasing smirk creeping back. Yeah, but do we really want to go back to reality just yet? I laughed, the kind of laugh that comes from relief and nerves all tangled together. I guess we don't have to. For a moment, we just sat there, hands still entwined, listening to the train slow down and the familiar clatter of wheels on tracks. It was one of those moments where time feels both fast and slow, like you're caught between two worlds. The train came to a stop, and a handful of passengers stepped off, some glancing at us with curiosity, others too tired to notice. Jamie finally released my hand and stood up, brushing rain off his jacket. Come on, let's get out of this place before someone decides it's a hangout spot for weirdos, he joked. I pulled myself up, feeling that odd mix of excitement and hesitation. We started walking toward the station entrance, the wet pavement slick beneath our shoes. Outside, the air was fresher, the rain having washed the city clean for the moment. It smelled like wet concrete and something faintly floral, probably those stubborn flowers someone planted near the station entrance. So, Jamie said as we stepped onto the street, "What happens now?" I looked over at him, the streetlights casting soft shadows on his face. There was something open there, like he was waiting for me to lead or suggest the next move. "Well," I said, "I guess we could try to catch that next train, but it won't get me home for at least an hour. Or, Jamie prompted, raising an eyebrow. I hesitated. "Or you could come over. I've got a couch, some snacks, and maybe a movie or two." His smile was immediate, genuine. Sounds tempting. And just like that, we were wandering through the quiet streets, laughing about the night's ridiculousness, and sharing little stories I hadn't even told my closest friends. It was funny how missing the last train had forced us into this unintended adventure. When we got to my apartment, Jamie flopped down on the couch like it was the most comfortable place in the world. And honestly, seeing him so relaxed made me realize how much I wanted nights like this. Unplanned, messy, real. I popped open a couple of beers and settled in next to him, the easy silence between us filling the room. The city hummed faintly outside the window, but inside, it felt like our own little bubble. After a while, Jamie turned toward me, his expression softer. "You know, I wasn't expecting to meet someone tonight, especially not someone who makes me feel like I'm not just passing time." I blinked, heart skipping. "Yeah?" "Yeah." He smiled, that shy, slightly nervous smile that somehow made him even more attractive. Maybe missing the last train wasn't such a disaster after all. I reached out, brushing a stray lock of hair from his forehead. "I'm glad you think so." The tension between us shifted, heavier now, charged with all the things we hadn't said but were starting to feel. I could tell Jamie felt it too, the way his eyes flicked to my lips for a second, before dropping back to mine. "Can I be honest?" he asked quietly. "Always." He took a deep breath. "I don't do this kind of thing often. I mean, I'm not great at this whole dating thing. But tonight felt different, like maybe I'm not so afraid of getting close." That hit me harder than I expected. I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. "Me too. I've been scared to admit that." Jamie's hand found mine again, fingers threading together like they belonged there. "Then maybe we should stop being scared." I smiled, feeling that familiar warmth spread through me. "I'm all for that." The next few hours blurred together. Quiet conversation, stolen glances, the occasional nervous laugh. At one point, Jamie rested his head on my shoulder, and it felt like the safest place in the world. Neither of us knew where this was going, but for the first time in a long time, that didn't matter. As dawn started to creep through the curtains, painting the room in soft pinks and oranges, I realized something important. Sometimes, the worst nights lead to the best beginnings. And maybe missing that last train was exactly what I needed to find something real. I looked down at Jamie, eyes closed, peaceful in sleep, and I knew I wasn't ready to let go. Not now, not ever. Morning light filtered through the thin curtains, casting a soft glow on Jamie's face as he slept. I watched him for a long moment, half afraid to break the calm, the way his chest rose and fell gently, his eyelashes resting lightly on his cheeks. It was surreal, how someone you barely knew could suddenly feel like home. I didn't want to wake him, but the rumbling in my stomach reminded me that all-night whiskey and beer weren't the best breakfast plan. I slid off the couch quietly, careful not to disturb him, and shuffled into the kitchen. The apartment was still silent except for the faint buzz of the fridge. I grabbed some bread and peanut butter from the cupboard, figuring that was about as fancy as I could get this early. While I was making 2 sandwiches, I thought about the night before, the shelter, the rain, the laughter, the hand-holding, and the way everything had shifted without us noticing. Jamie appeared in the doorway, rubbing the sleep from his eyes, hair tousled in that perfectly messy way he had. "Morning," he mumbled, voice rough but warm. "Morning," I said, handing him a sandwich. "Hungry?" He smiled, teeth just barely showing, and took a bite. "Starving." We sat on the couch, eating like it was the most natural thing in the world, and for a moment, it was just two guys sharing a quiet morning. No pressure, no expectations, just this peaceful normalcy. So, Jamie said between bites, "What do we tell people about last night? That we missed the last train and got drunk in a creepy shelter?" I laughed. "That's a great conversation starter, actually." He grinned, eyes shining. "Yeah, or the perfect excuse to avoid awkward questions." I leaned back, thinking about what I really wanted. Honestly, I don't want last night to be a one-time thing. I want to see where this goes. Jamie's smile softened, and for a second I felt like the whole world had shrunk down to just the two of us. Me too. We spent the morning just talking about everything and nothing, sharing little bits of our lives we hadn't mentioned before. I learned that Jamie had been hesitant about dating after a rough breakup, and I admitted that I'd been more focused on work than anything else for a while. There was an honesty between us, a kind of openness that made me realize how rare moments like this were. Later, Jamie stretched and looked at his watch. "I should probably head out soon. Got some things to sort." I nodded, trying not to let the sudden thought of him leaving catch me off guard. "Yeah, me too." He stood and came over to the couch, hesitating for a second, before pulling me into a hug. It was warm and genuine, like a promise. "Thanks for last night," he said softly. "No, thank you," I replied, the words feeling heavier than usual. We stepped back, and Jamie reached out, brushing a finger along my cheek. His touch was light, but electric. "See you soon?" he asked. "Definitely," I promised. He smiled, that same shy, hopeful smile, then headed for the door. After he left, the apartment felt a bit emptier, but I wasn't sad, just anticipating. Like something had shifted, and I was ready to see what came next. Over the next few days, we kept texting and talking, slowly building up something that felt real. We met for coffee, went for walks in the park, and found ourselves laughing more than either of us expected. One afternoon, Jamie sent me a message that made my chest tighten. "Want to come over tonight? I have a new record and bad takeout." I showed up at his place that evening, and the night unfolded with easy conversation, music filling the background, and moments that made me think maybe this was what I'd been waiting for. As I looked at Jamie across his small living room, I realized that missing that last train wasn't a mistake. It was the start of something unexpected, messy, and beautiful. And honestly, I couldn't wait to see where it would take us. I remember stepping into Jamie's apartment that night, instantly feeling like I'd crossed into some kind of cozy sanctuary far from the chaos of the world. It wasn't a huge place, just a modest living room with a worn couch, shelves of books crammed into every corner, and that old record player sitting proudly on a side table. The kind of place that felt lived in, comfortable, and perfectly imperfect. Jamie was already there, sprawled on the couch with a takeout box in his lap, grinning like he was hiding some mischievous secret. "Welcome to my humble abode," he said, waving a hand around the room. I laughed and dropped my jacket on a nearby chair. "I like it, way better than that god-awful shelter." He shrugged, playfully defensive. Hey, that shelter had character. We settled in, the smell of spicy noodles and fried rice filling the air as we ate straight from the containers, no plates, no fancy stuff. It was casual, real, and exactly what I needed after the whirlwind of our first accidental night together. Jamie popped a record onto the player, a crackly old vinyl that spun out mellow jazz tunes. The music wrapped around us like a warm blanket, and I couldn't help but notice how the soft glow of the lamp made his features look almost tender in the dim light. So I started, "What's the story behind this place? Feels like you've been collecting memories here." He smiled, setting his chopsticks down. "Yeah, it's kind of my fortress. Books, records, a few plants that somehow survive despite me forgetting to water them. It's where I come back to myself." I nodded, feeling an unexpected pull toward him and the quiet honesty he was offering. "I get that. I'm usually all about staying busy, but when I'm here, it's like the noise fades away." Jamie's eyes met mine, and there was something unspoken hanging between us. An invitation, maybe, or a question. I felt my heart skip a beat. Without thinking, I reached over and took his hand, fingers intertwining, like they fit perfectly. Jamie didn't pull away. Instead, his thumb brushed softly over the back of my hand. For a moment, The room held its breath, the jazz playing softly as the outside world slipped away. "So," he murmured, voice low, "what happens now?" I swallowed, feeling both nervous and ready. "I don't know, but I'd like to find out." Jamie smiled, that shy, hopeful smile that made my knees feel weak. He leaned in slowly, and before I could overthink it, our lips met, soft, tentative at first, then deeper as the seconds stretched into minutes. When we finally pulled apart, breathless and grinning like fools, I realized how much I'd wanted him. The night stretched on with laughter, whispered stories, and the kind of closeness that sneaks up when you least expect it. We talked about our fears, our past mistakes, and the awkwardness of trying to figure out what comes next. At one point, Jamie rested his head on my shoulder, and I felt this overwhelming sense of belonging, like maybe I'd stumbled into something rare. Later, when it was time to leave, neither of us was ready to say goodbye. Outside, the streetlights flickered as a cool breeze swept through the city, carrying the faint scent of early spring. Jamie hesitated, then reached out, fingers curling around mine again. "Maybe missing that last train was the best thing that ever happened." I laughed softly. "Yeah, who knew disaster could be so sweet?" He pulled me into a hug, tighter this time, and I knew that whatever came next, we'd face it together. Walking home in the quiet night, I couldn't stop smiling. Because sometimes, when you think you're lost, life throws you a detour that leads exactly where you need to be. And honestly, I was ready to follow that path with Jamie, wherever it might take us. The following week felt like a strange, wonderful blur. I'd never been the type to get wrapped up so quickly with someone, but with Jamie, things moved at their own pace, slow and steady, with just enough sparks to keep me hooked. We texted almost constantly, sometimes about nothing, sometimes about everything. There was a comfort in that, like we were building this quiet, invisible thread between us. One evening, Jamie invited me over again. This time, he had a plan, or at least an idea. "I've got this little project I want your opinion on," he said when I arrived, leading me into his cluttered, book-lined living room. On the coffee table was a sketchbook, its pages filled with different drawings, buildings, streets, people, and even a few awkward self-portraits. Jamie's not exactly an artist, but there was something raw and honest about his sketches. "I've been thinking of starting a comic," he said, tracing a line on one of the pages. "Just little stories about people, life, and all the mess in between." I smiled, impressed. "That's awesome. You should definitely do it." He shrugged, a little embarrassed. "It's scary putting that kind of stuff out there." I nodded, understanding completely. "Yeah, but sometimes the scary stuff is the most real, and it's what people connect to." Jamie looked at me, eyes searching. "Since when did you get so wise?" I laughed. "I'm full of surprises." We spent the evening flipping through his sketches, talking about the stories behind each one. It was like peeking into his mind, and I felt lucky to be invited in. As the night wore on, the conversation grew quieter, more intimate. Jamie reached over and took my hand again, fingers lacing naturally. "You ever think about what you want?" he asked softly. I considered it. "Honestly, I used to think I had it all figured out. But now I just want to be with someone who gets me, who's willing to be messy and imperfect with me." His smile was slow and real. "Yeah, me too." That night when I left his place, the city was buzzing with life. Late-night diners, laughter spilling out of bars, the distant hum of traffic. I felt like I was walking on air, caught in a kind of hopeful daydream. But life has a way of reminding you that it's not always so simple. A few days later, Jamie called me, sounding tense. "Hey, can we talk? Like, in person?" My stomach dropped. "Of course. What's up?" When I got to his place, he was pacing, biting his lip. "I have to be honest, I'm scared." I pulled him into a hug, steadying him. "Scared of what?" "Of this," he said, gesturing between us. "Of letting someone in and getting hurt again." I understood. "I'm scared too, but I'd rather be scared with you than alone." Jamie looked up, eyes shimmering. "I don't want to mess this up." "You won't," I promised. "We're figuring it out together." That night, we talked for hours about fears, about past hurts, about hopes. It wasn't always easy, but it felt real, and that mattered. A week later, we took a day trip to the coast. The air was salty, the sky overcast but bright. We walked along the shore, shoes in hand, waves lapping at our feet. Jamie leaned into me, and I wrapped my arm around his waist. "Thanks for being my last train," he said with a grin. I laughed. "And you're mine." We stood there for a while just watching the horizon. In that moment, it didn't matter where we were headed, just that we were going there together. We spent that day by the water almost wordless, just letting the rhythm of the waves fill the space between us. Jamie's hand in mine felt as natural as breathing, and for the first time in a long while, the future felt less like a question mark and more like something I could look forward to. It wasn't about grand gestures or perfect moments. It was about the quiet, steady presence of someone who saw you, flaws and all, and didn't run away. On the walk back to the car, Jamie stopped and looked up at the sky, a soft smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Funny how missing a train can lead you somewhere completely unexpected," he said. I nodded, squeezing his hand gently. "Yeah, it's like life's way of telling us to slow down and actually pay attention." We didn't need to say more. The city lights were far behind us now, replaced by the gentle hush of the evening sea breeze. I realized then that it wasn't about fixing everything all at once or having all the answers. It was about being willing to take the chance, to be vulnerable, and to trust someone enough to let them in. Driving back later, I glanced over at Jamie asleep in the passenger seat, peaceful and real, and felt a warmth spread through me that had nothing to do with the heat of the car. Maybe missing that last train wasn't a misstep at all. Maybe it was the start of something better, something neither of us saw coming but both quietly hoped for. And as the city skyline came back into view, twinkling like a promise, I knew I wasn't alone anymore. Not with Jamie by my side, not in this messy, unpredictable life. And that made all the difference.